Okay. I call this meeting to order at 6:05. Alex sends his condolences. He could not be here today. Let's just jump right into things. Okay. Territorial acknowledgement. The Board of Directors acknowledges that the University of Waterloo is on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our organization operates on the Haldeman Tract, land promised to the Six Nations, which includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Agenda approval. This is a motion submitted by the chair. Be it resolved that the chair approves the meeting agenda as presented. Do I have a second? No. Is there any discussion? Katie?
I move that we amend the agenda to bring the confidential session up earlier. Can I? Yeah.
Is there a second? Eileen? Is there any discussion?
Second confidential session needs to be brought up earlier. Need Matthew Schwartz to talk at an earlier time for convenience of board.
Any other discussion? Okay, I raise the question. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. I see 8 on our side. I can't see the ones online. Okay, put your hand down. Okay. All those opposed? I don't see any. Okay. The motion is adopted. So then I move that we immediately go into confidential session. Is there any discussion? Okay, raise the question. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Takes it by consensus. We move now into whenever you're ready. Let us know when we're back live. Thank you. Okay. As I said earlier, we're going to move back to 1.4 because we accidentally went right to comprehensive session without finishing the preliminaries. So are there any conflicts of interest? Not seeing anything, so no conflicts of interest declared at this time. Minutes approval. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes of the public session of the previous meeting? And the minutes stand approved as distributed. Okay. Moving on to 3.1, an update on communication between student governments and large bodies. I will move this motion. Is there anyone to second it? Katie? Is there any discussion on this motion? Or actually, I think it's an information piece.
Yes, and Melissa isn't here right now, so I guess I direct the question to the officers or Mike if any further efforts have been made to make governance more accessible to the general student body.
Any of the directors like to speak to that? If not, I would ask if Mike would please speak to that. If he could. Thank you, Mike. Is there any further discussion? Yes,
I have a question. I know on the WUSA Instagram account for April, there was like a post about things that happen at board meetings. Is that an ongoing thing? Does that happen every month? Thank you.
Yes, Stephanie?
Just an item for consideration for the annual plan, but I'm wondering if it would make sense to strike an ad hoc committee on this so that we can be a little bit more focused and because I'm not sure if some of the methods that have been taken to reach out to students and make WUSA more accessible have actually been meaningfully more accessible. I think I've heard a lot of good ideas come from directors at different points of time, including just during campaign period, but also last year as well. It seems to me, in my personal opinion, that WUSA has become a little bit more of a black box than it was before. It's just a little bit harder to engage, especially the way that the agenda is structured, where it gets interrupted by a confidential session partway through, and that it literally happens in a room that I guess you could like press your face against here, but it just seems that it does not emphasize communication as much as I'd seen from WUSA before. I think that's something worth our consideration. It might be handy because transparency is a very good, thing to have within your governance structure. The other suggestion that I would say out loud too is when it comes to the clusters, publishing who's on what cluster and who's on what university committee and whatnot might make sense, because then it would enable students to know who to reach out to regarding various things and who's considered like the subject matter expert on XYZ within board.
Jay, if you'd like to speak to this, I know you had put something in the chat.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Just speaking of the large committee recruitment, the thing I brought up this in the last meeting is I only saw like a Instagram story posting and a LinkedIn posting regarding the large members.
Privilege.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Hello?
Can you speak a little bit more clearly?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you now, but just sort of, you can speak a little bit slower. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm near Kitchener, or not Kitchener, I'm in Guelph, and the service is not very good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It's a bit better.
Oh, it's a little better. I was just saying that like for the large member for the committee, I only saw like an Instagram story posting. Is that why we didn't fill up? And because like for the Instagram, we can only stay up one day, and LinkedIn posting like no one check LinkedIn very often. So
Sorry,
is that
Jay,
why
can
we
you
didn't?
type it in chat?
Okay,
I'm so
well,
sorry.
gee.
Okay, well, Jay is typing that. I'm going to go to Katie.
It was just about what Steph said about the clusters. That is something that I have discussed internally, mainly just through Rory, myself, and Mike. But publishing who's on what cluster is something that I want to do, especially in some form of publishing the different priorities for each cluster. So, for example, the priorities that, let's say, each of you or in your cluster submitted to me, I have on a document, and submitting that or spreading that around the wider student body is something that I think could be very beneficial in increasing communications. Of course, that was really more of a step after the annual plan was established, as well as once the board committees were up and running with at-large members, which could assist with, let's say, advo priorities and the development of the clusters and their communications to the wider public.
Yeah, I just guess my final note on this is like, of course, the comm stuff seems a little bit operational, but at the same time, I think sort of clear communication about governance issues does fall within the remit of board. It fits within a weird area, which is why I think it makes sense to have sort of as what we discussed in the legal session with Pat, that by making an ad hoc committee that is empowered to be a little bit more hands-on, then it's not necessarily deviating from the structure too much, but just from what I've observed, just the speed of stuff getting done and the amounts of like communications on governance stuff that are sort of coming out, it's not where it needs to be at. And I wonder if it makes a little bit more sense to have student leaders be a little bit more involved in that process to get us where we need to be. Obviously, we could rely on staff for a lot of expertise and whatnot, but it's just something that I would want a little bit more operational oversight over, just because it like hasn't really been at the level that I think it needs to be at, and it's something that WUSA I think has struggled with for a very long time.
Is there any further discussion on this item? Stan?
Sorry.
No, it's not wrong.
Is this also something that can be brought up for ownership consultation, like asking students, like where are they seeing communications, what ways would they like to see communications, that sort of thing?
I would say yes, it can be something that the ownership consultation committee can look into. If Stephanie, you're wanting to raise that as a motion, you can do it in new business.
I was going to wait until we get, like, I was waiting to see how the annual plan shapes out to get a better sense of whether or not we have the capacity to do it, but I just wanted to start the discussion, put it in people's minds. My preference would be to have an independent ad hoc committee that's supposed to deliver specific deliverables for how to structure the pages and how to structure communications, et cetera, as opposed to just putting it underneath the ownership consultation committee. Because again, I think that this does end up a little bit more operational, and I don't think that's a precedent I want to set, but I do think it's a necessity.
When you mentioned independent, in that case, are you requesting that if you do put this motion through for the ad hoc committee, that we don't appoint directors from the board to that committee and only have at-large members?
We can shape it however we wish. Probably, like it depends on people's capacities or whatnot. But like, the board is empowered to create ad hoc committees, and they can create the terms of reference by which those committees exist.
Any other discussion? Since this is not a motion, it is just an informational thing, we will move on to number 4.1, new business. Okay. So the motion is, be it resolved that the board approve the at-large composition for board committees as presented. This will be presented by me because Katie has just stepped out. Is there any seconders? Kevin? Is there any discussion on this motion? Yes, Stephanie.
Were these all the applications we got?
These for all the approved applications that we got, yes.
What do you mean by approved?
That is a question for confidential session.
Can you speak to it in general terms?
I'll speak to it. One application was not seen to be appropriate, and so was decided to be discarded. Any other discussion? Yes, Stephanie?
Hey, Rory, can you...
Sorry, Jay?
Questions. One, have the students who applied to be on these committees, are we sure that they're aware of the restrictions that will be on them by virtue of sitting on a WUSA committee, specifically with regards to, I believe, employment of the organization? And secondly, have we determined honorara for sitting on board committees as an at-large member?
Question. Mike, I know that you went through this a little bit. Do you know if any conflict would arise with regards to employment within WUSA with these committees? And then also the second question, if you have any information.
So just to clarify, I meant like, have the students been informed of the consequence of joining? Because I want to make sure that students are aware of that before they take it on. Because I did get the sense that some people might not read directly within the policies to locate that. Can we, when we inform folks, if they are successful in being on the committee, can we inform them before they formally accept? And just point to some of the larger sort of pieces that might impact how they move about in their day-to-day life?
Any other discussion on this item?
Hey, Rory, can you hear me?
Yep.
I'll type because the signal is really not good.
We can hear you for the start, and then we cannot hear you after that. I'm sorry to say, Jay, you might be stuck to the chat on this one. Yeah.
Can you see my message in the chat?
Yes, we can see your question now. Mike, if you don't mind, answer that one. Yes, we can see your question. Any other discussion?
I'll speak on that maybe a little bit. So to my knowledge, like Michelle is currently working for or recently worked for the sustainability office. And I'm pretty sure that environmentalism is her area of interest with regards to advocacy. Simultaneously, though, the advocacy committee is not doing the advocacy, nor is it formulating all of the advocacy positions. It's more of identifying specific gaps within the policy positions. We might ask that she submit it on a conflict of interest form so that we're mindful of that when it comes to creating any stances that might be there. But I personally would take it as useful knowledge that you can draw upon. I think if we had restrictions with students being employed with the university, in addition to being employed with WUSA, that would make these roles very inaccessible and very unappealing to a lot of people. So yeah, I don't see it as a problem, Jay, but to bring it up and discuss.
Yes, I do.
Is the only restriction in for WUSA part-time, or nothing to use?
I don't believe there's anything currently with the university. I believe the one restriction is that you cannot be a staff member at WUSA and also on a board or committee at the same time. Any other discussion?
Did we answer Jay's question in the chat?
I believe that question. Okay, not hearing any further discussion, I move the question. All those in favor of approving those candidates, please raise your hand now. Okay, it is taken by consensus. And Jay is saying he'll abstain. So, moving to number 4.2, approval for date of a special general meeting to present the audited financial statements for the 2021-2022 governing year. Are there any seconders? Okay. Is there any discussion on this item?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but for a special general meeting, it still empowers students to submit items to the agenda.
Esther, do you mind answering that question?
Yes.
If so, do we have a date set for the deadline in which they need to submit their motions? And are we in, do we have a schedule for all the little things that we have to take off to make those happen?
Well, the way the policy manual is drafted, although the recommendation is to go with the timelines for the annual general meeting, but for special meetings, the notice needs to go out 10 days before the meeting. So once we were able to get the items from the students before 10 days before, then we should be fine.
So they will have, so basically they just have to submit their motions by July 1st.
Okay, no, because it will need to go to board. I get your point. So we could probably give them a deadline of maybe mid-June or something so that I can get to board for approval.
Let's say
15th, yeah.
15th?
Because I'm just thinking, because we also need to circulate.
Because the board will need to
review
it. Yeah.
Are we changing the date of the GM to the 15th?
No, I'm just
No, we're not changing the dates.
Just amending a motion to include clarification that the board accepts the deadline for member submitted proposal as whatever date Esther just said.
So the 15th of June then?
Yes.
That is still pretty early considering we have another board meeting on the 28th. But if that is the motion, Is that an official motion, Stephanie?
Mhm.
Okay. Anyone second?
We could give them more time.
Katie? So it's been seconded now. Any discussion, Matthew?
I don't see why it would need to be the 15th if our board meeting's not till the 28th.
Further discussion, please?
I think to encourage engagement to a certain extent, especially with the special general meetings. When you say it'd be more wise for us, if we want more interaction with different students from different groups, if we postponed it till later.
Yeah.
My only concern with that is, yes, we just have to make sure that like we have ample time to distribute the agenda to the membership, so they can make any proxy votes. But if so what's the schedule for the board meetings? It's on the 28th and it's the 15th, another board meeting, or?
Yes, the 15th is another board meeting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess as long as we're prepared, like for the 28th.
For the 20th is the next board meeting after.
Well, yeah, to approve the agenda and then distribute it, because that will, be important to notifying the members what's going on so that they can make an informed choice whether or not to use proxy votes and stuff like that. And also, yeah, so if you want to amend the other date, I'd be supportive of that.
Yeah, I'd like to motion to amend the day to maybe the 21st, which would still give a week gap just in case of any unexpected things.
Sounds good. Any seconders? Katie? Okay. Is there any other discussion on this item? Okay, I'm going to make it clear now that approval of this amendment also is approval of the main motion.
That message, I'll read it. That says, this might be too in the weeds. This motion is just to decide the date. Other timelines will be decided by Esther in days to come.
Like, I think it's important that we clarify the date for this now as well.
I'll raise the question then. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay. So, motion is adopted. Now, moving on to item 4.3, approval of additional funds for WUSA to secure a permanent tenancy in the Davis Center, which is DC, or whether they would set up another turnkey desk. So, is there anyone seconding this motion?
Sorry, point of order, can we go back to the previous motion?
This motion?
Yeah, you usually have to also specify the place. So like if it's being held online or if it's being held like on the University of Waterloo campus or et cetera, et cetera. Like we didn't make explicit whether or not we were allowing people to access it through telephonic means. Is it going to be a hybrid meeting? Is it going to be like a solely in-person meeting, or is it going to be a solely online meeting?
Not sure, it was not in the original motion. Esther, do you have something to say to that?
Yeah, I took this from the motion that we used the last time. Although I understand where Steph is coming from, because a subsequent decision was made and concerning the meetings being physical because of IT. So I just assumed that we were going because of that decision that was made the last time and the fact that hybrid would not really work. So I was going to, when we're sending out the actual notice, it was actually going to read that it's physical, not hybrid.
Are there requirements in the bylaws or procedure to specify where the meeting is being held?
Yes, that will be specified in the notice itself.
Oh, okay. But it doesn't need to be specified in the motion.
No.
Okay.
Okay. Moving back to number 4.3, which has already been seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Yes, Steve.
I was just hoping, I know Director Operations and Development was Prashant. I was just hoping if there was anyone else who could speak to this motion, mainly because although I see the necessity in providing more locations for the turnkey desk and alleviating the financial burden from COVID as stated in the motion itself, I was just hoping to hear more because I am not so inclined to really accept the motion when I feel as though the turnkey desk in SLC will still be more successful than an expansion in DC.
I don't know if there are any staff members who are on the call currently who could maybe speak more to the motion.
I can.
I saw it.
Hi,
I
how are you? Good. Do you guys have any specific questions or?
Katie?
I was just wondering if the operations of the current turnkey desk at SLC is not really meeting expectations, which is why we are trying to expand to DC for turnkey.
So we've actually been in the Davis Center since 2018. We capture a lot more students, particularly with transit, with Go Transit and FedBus at those locations because of its proximity to the bus platforms as well as the GRT. So it's primarily focused on transit, but it supports our long-range plan of being in more locations beyond the SLC, and it's a permanent location because right now we're in a temporary quarters and we need this additional funds to secure a permanent location.
Jay asked, which I might follow why 30K is needed. Thank you for also bringing up the DC point. I was aware that there was a turnkey there, but not really the specific location since I don't really wander around DC that much.
Okay. We were approved for $90,000 last year for the location in the Davis Center. However, costs have gone up, labor and materials, since the last year. We had to change the scope slightly because the project, we've been working on the project since 2019, and leadership in computer science changed, and we were at risk of losing the location that they had agreed to give us, and we were advised by the space management office that if it escalated up to the provost level that we might not get to keep the location. So the agreement was that we would stay in our current location, but we would build a replacement room for computer science. So that has increased the current costs slightly, and labor and materials have increased so drastically over the last year.
Staff will respond next.
Scott, I'm not sure if you can answer all of my questions, but hopefully you can answer some of them. So how much of this money is going towards building the room for the School of Computer Science? And also, are we aware if funding something for the School of Computing is, I guess, within the remit of the capital fund, because we collect that fee for a specific purpose, right? So I wonder if there's going to be issues there if we're building something that isn't explicitly for us.
Okay. The project, it's about 50-50. So $60,000 is going to the renovations of our ticket booth, making it accessible, user-friendly, to support all of the equipment that we have. And then there is the cost of $60,000 for the new storage room for computer science. This is enabling us to get permanent tenancy of our space. So it's sort of like an acquisition cost to getting this space, is to providing a replacement space.
Katie first, then Steph, then Matthew.
I mean, I'm not sure this question has to be answered, and I don't think it will necessarily influence the conversation that we're having. I was just wondering if there are other alternative locations that could be considered. But I know DC already has the turnkey desk, so I'm going to say for the sake of this conversation moving forward, we can move on to Steph and ignore the question I just asked.
Okay.
How do we know the university isn't going to take this from us once we build it? Like, a lot of things.
The space is going to be permanently assigned to us by the space management office. At that point, we would have to, well, nothing is guaranteed, but we would have to agree to give it up.
I believe you mentioned $50,000 each. Do you mean 50%?
Sorry, it's 50%. It's about $60,000 for the construction of our booth, and $60,000 to construct this empty frame of the room. There are some costs because we have to relocate fire alarms and sprinkler heads that have increased the costs.
I'll quickly ask one more question, and it's probably something that can be answered as well. Or maybe not, but it depends. Were students consulted on whether they wanted to see the development of the current turnkey desk space in DC? Or, for example, were there any complaints against its ability to service students? I guess you could say I understand the justification for wanting to create that permanency, but I know a big thing about board this time is student consultation and making sure that we actually have input from people who are using services. So I was wondering if you could perhaps answer that.
Well, a lot of students do use it on a daily basis. A substantial portion of our transit sales do occur outside of the SLC. So students have it's been very well received, and expanding services, is part of the SLC long range plan beyond the SLC. So students were consulted with that plan.
Okay.
One more addition to what Katie said earlier. So wouldn't it be a better idea to have it in like another building rather than DC, since we already have, not just because we already have a turnkey in DC, but also you notice that DC and SLC, since they're like kind of close together, they notice the same student population generally goes to both these buildings. Whereas there's like other buildings, like engineering buildings, for example, where students that have classes there or go to the study spaces there don't generally go out of their way to come to SLC, for example. So wouldn't having a turnkey desk in one of these buildings be a better idea?
We have thought about doing other buildings beyond that, someplace in South Campus, but one of the primary focuses is to support the transit programs, and this is one of the closest buildings to the transit hub. There's a lot of people who cut through this building on the way to the ION, the GO platforms, as well as our Fed bus program does depart from the Davis Center.
I guess since the $90,000 was approved last year, has any work been done since, and how much has that cost?
No work has been done at this point in time.
So it's up $30,000 in 1 year?
The total cost of the program or the renovations is $120,000. $90,000 was approved by the Planning and Spaceworks Committee in 2022, but we have not spent it at this point in time.
Okay. So the 33% increase is like purely materials and labor?
Materials, labor, and the slight change in scope. Because we had to agree to build this room.
The room was not part of the previous plan, or?
The previous plan, we were going to have a location in front of the fishbowl. The little yellow cutout was going to be built into a booth there. That the costs for that were substantially more because there was a lot of custom work because it was in a circular shape. So the costs from our room have gone down, but the costs for creating the second room for computer science, because computer science no longer wanted to give us that place in the fishbowl, and the Space Management Office advised us not to let it escalate to the provost level because they did not think that we would be able to secure that space if it went for the provost to make a decision, because they would decide on the faculty. So we wanted to be very good neighbors and work with the faculty of math and computer science, because we didn't want to be perceived as to be difficult or challenging to work with for us to explore other projects in the future.
Stephanie?
Just to clarify, the last time this went to board, the computer science room was not part of the deal.
It was not.
Okay. In that case, I am putting a motion in the chat. Motion to postpone discussion until someone can clarify whether funding construction for a space used by a non-WUSA unit is within the remit of the WUSA Capital Fund. Scott, I just want a little bit more clarification from Suzanne to make sure that things are all right, or someone who knows the ins and outs of how the capital fund is structured, because I think it's like a reserve fund, and if we use it for something that it's not supposed to, that could have consequences. So.
Okay. Is there any other questions?
Let's start with that amendment. Is there anyone seconding that amendment? Matthew? Okay, is there any discussion on the amendment itself? Not seeing anything? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please raise your hand. It'll be postponed until a later date. Is there any more discussion on this item, or are we? Okay. Someone has their hand up. Yeah. Or is that from the vote?
Phantom hand.
Okay. Okay, so we're done with 4.3. We've also done confidential session. So notice of motion for next term, or for next meeting. So the next meeting, I believe, is on the 14th of June, same time as this one. So Stephanie is going to bring a motion forward related to student care. As well, there will also be another motion related to our annual plan. Next, our general reports. So I hope you all have gotten a chance to look at what the executive report looks like. So Suzanne's report. Sadly, Suzanne is not here at the moment, but do you guys have any questions with regards to that report? Not seeing anything. Oh.
All right. I guess just a bit of clarification here. From what I remember previously, whenever a new position was added, like a permanent role, it had to go through board for approval. I see that the advocacy specialist role is ready to be posted. Did it change within the new policies that they could just be approved whenever, because there's a financial consequence to doing that and a long-term organizational consequence. So to me, I'm a little bit concerned if there is a gap in terms of board not being able to approve changes like that. Also, if there is a policy that states that it needs to go to board, then I don't believe that this one has.
I do not know if there are any full-time staff in the meeting right now who would be able to answer your question. Maybe Esther.
No, the current policy manual doesn't make that state that requirement for it to go to board. So I guess that's why.
Thank you, Esther.
Just
Kevin?
a question about sounds like it's no longer a WUSA service in most of ICE. Just wondering like what kind of changes would be it's no longer a WUSA service.
I definitely might know the most about this. If you want to talk to it, I can talk to it.
I'll speak to what I know, but I also was not really made aware of much of this. So WUSA services generally exist to fulfill a function that the university isn't completing. So every now and then they'll come and go. So this is one of those cases. I imagine just the service manager at the time decided that it was time to go, and also engage in conversations with the co-op office to try and absorb that. I suspect, but I'm not completely sure, that their room within the SLC might migrate. They might not have permanent space anymore. I'm not really sure what everything looks like, so that might be something you ask for follow-up from. But yeah, that's generally what happens when a service sort of goes away. But I think this is, I've heard about it in passing from other things, but like I don't think in my capacity as president or as board that I've ever heard about the change formally.
Okay. Are there any announcements anyone would like to give? Yes, Stephanie?
All right. I was wondering if we can move back into confidential session, and if we could talk about the other thing, but also if we could talk about something else too.
Sounds good. Stephanie has motion to move into confidential session. Is there any seconder? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Seems motion is adopted, and we will move back into